Elizabeth May. Just think of it. Elizabeth May was recognized as a Parliamentarian of the Year. And she's the only one in the Green Party. That was 2012. 2013, she was considered the busiest and most workaholic of MPs. And this is by a Conservative majority. Get it? So I guess she really is affecting Parliament in a positive manner. And without further ado, I would like to introduce Elizabeth May.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you all for being here today. I have to express an enormous emotion called guilt that you're indoors today. When it's so beautiful outside. So I'm very grateful and humbled that you would choose to come indoors rather than, I won't keep reminding all of us how nice it is outside. But it really is an extraordinary thing on a beautiful Sunday, Palm Sunday, sunny afternoon. Oh, wow, my voice is gone. Everybody hears me all right now for sure. Okay. It's an extraordinary thing that so many of you have chosen to come. Now, this is a town hall meeting, and I don't know how many of you have been to town hall meetings before. What I do in my own riding is I hold in 9 different locations, twice a year, town hall meetings just to report back to my constituents, whom I collectively refer to as my boss, to let them know what I've been doing in Ottawa and to hear from them what their concerns are about things that are happening that I might not know about. And it's extraordinarily helpful to me. I have done some town hall meetings since then. I did 18 on a cross-country road trip. I decided when Stephen Harper prorogued Parliament in this fall, so it was around September, that he announced we wouldn't be resuming until mid-October, and I suddenly had some empty days in my calendar, so we managed to fit in 18 different town halls on the question of the threats to Canadian democracy. We called that tour Save Democracy from Politics. And as I stand here before you, I will confess that I haven't quite figured out what I want to talk about. Or what I'm planning to say. So I'll pause for a moment and at least recognize that in the hall, and I hope I've spotted everybody, other elected public servants of Vancouver Island, our island, who are doing a wonderful job for us. So I want to thank Mayor Josie Osborne, Mayor of Tofino, for being here. There's Josie. Council member from the village of Qualicum Beach. I think I saw Scott Tanner in here earlier. There he is. What did you say?
I said it's a town. It grew up from a village.
Oh, sorry. The town, the major megalopolis of Qualicum Beach. And thank goodness he could get here because I heard the metro was snarled up, so it's a good thing. And did I miss anybody else in the room who's an elected representative of municipal or provincial government? Well, it's the greatest honor I've ever had to represent Saanich Gulf Islands in the House of Commons. Adrian mentioned that other additional honor of being named Parliamentarian of the Year and then Hardest Working MP. The part about those awards that really is significant is not that, the part that's most significant to me is the process by which they make that designation. And I'm going to share it with you because I think it's just fabulous. It's a secret ballot of all members of Parliament. It's run by Maclean's magazine, and every year they give every member of Parliament the chance to vote on who they think, and there's a bunch of different categories. And there's Parliamentarian of the Year, and there's Hardest Working MP, and there's Best Constituency MP, and there's Best Orator, and there's all kinds of categories. And I went to and they basically made it clear to my staff that I better show up when they did the fall of 2012 awards. And they didn't have a category for it, but I kind of thought I might win Miss Congeniality or something, right? I was thinking, okay, I've made friends with everybody, so that'll be cool. But as the awards were all handed out, you know, best orator, and it wasn't me, I thought, gee, I thought I might have a shot at that. And then best constituency MP, and well, that, you know. So then, but they gave away best hardest working. The only thing left was Parliamentarian of the Year. And I turned to one of my best friends, who's my chief of staff, and I said, Deborah, I'm not going to win anything tonight. She said, you must be Parliamentarian of the Year. I said, no, I can't be Parliamentarian of the Year. It's a secret, it's all the MPs vote. They're not going to elect the only Green Party member of Parliament in the House of Commons Parliamentarian of the Year. It's just, and then they announced dead Parliamentarian of the Year. So I got up on stage. I was so shocked. I mean, anyway, it's why I wanted to mention the way in which that award was granted is that I think it is validation for something that I firmly believe, and which was a theme in the democracy tour that I did, which is that the members of Parliament who represent all of us in the House of Commons, the 307 other people besides me elected on May 2nd, 2011, by like 99.9 are very dedicated, community-minded, public-spirited, and hardworking. And once they're elected, they find out, this isn't the job I quite thought it was. It's only after they're elected that a lot of people find out, oh, this job is about doing what I'm told from a bunch of people in the back room of my leader's office. My friend Bruce Heyer, who's now the second Green Party MP in the House of Commons, he represents Thunder Bay Superior North. And he'd been sitting as an independent for just under 2 years when he decided to come over and join me. He didn't actually have to come over because we've been sitting next to each other for the 2 years since he left the MVP. But he told me that one of the sadder conversations he'd had with a newly elected New Democratic Party MP right after the 2011 election, the young member said to him, you know, I was disappointed at first to find out that I couldn't bring my own ideas forward and speak for myself in the House, but I've kind of realized now my job is to be a customer service representative for a previous sale back to the customer base. And if that's my job, I guess that's okay, I'll do that job. But one of the things that I'd like to talk about, and I'm going to open up the floor and hear what you're concerned about, and you can ask anything about anything, because that's the point of a town hall meeting. But if there's a central theme to what I've learned since I was elected, it's that even though I'd written my last book in the fall of 2008, it came out in 2009, and it was called Losing Confidence, Power, Politics, and the Crisis in Canadian Democracy. So I can't tell you that when I got elected in May 2nd, 2011, I wasn't aware that Canadian democracy was in crisis. I was very aware that Canadian democracy was in crisis. But it's like that title of an old Bruce Cockburn song. The trouble with normal is it always gets worse. So once you accept that your democracy is kind of a shabby reflection of what it used to be, once you get used to the idea that members of Parliament read off cue cards and vote the way they're told, once you get used to the idea that people don't really mind if voter turnout is going down because people don't think their vote counts, because we've got a perverse voting system that allows a minority of the voters to elect a majority government. Once you get used to all that stuff and think, yeah, that's how it is, it's going to get worse. So what's happened since the majority of MPs for the Conservative Party were elected with the minority of public support, and we know it was the largest voting bloc in the 2011 election. I'm trying to inoculate you ahead of time to the fear of splitting the vote. Our big crisis in Canada isn't vote splitting, it's vote abandoning. Because the largest voting bloc in the 2011 election was the people who stayed home. If they could have had their votes registered, we would have a majority government called the stayed-at-home party, the didn't-vote party. And I'm getting warm up here. There were more people who didn't cast a ballot at all than who voted for a Conservative MP. It would be nice if our voting system could reflect that. But let's just take the 60% of Canadians who did vote, and within that, only 39% chose to put the X next to the name of a Conservative MP. So the voting system itself is a big part of the dysfunctionality in Canadian democracy. But what's gotten worse in the last 3 years has been that once Stephen Harper achieved a false majority, and false majority is not a term I've made up, one of my favorite and most knowledgeable and wise experts on Canadian democracy is a professor emeritus of political science from the University of Toronto, a man named Peter Russell. If you want to get out some great books from the library and read up Peter Russell, he's got a very thin volume called 2 Cheers for Minority Government, where he makes a pretty good case that we're better off in Canada when we have a minority parliament than when we have majorities. Anyway, very, very fascinating man. But he's the one who said, you know, when you have this phenomenon, which is only possible, of all the voting systems in the world, the only voting system that can deliver a majority government to a minority vote is the winner-take-all, first-past-the-post system. And he calls that, what we currently have in Canada, a false majority. So you basically got 4 options the way our voting system works. You can get a true minority, a true majority, a false minority, or a false majority. And in terms of democracy, the most dangerous of those options is a false majority. So since Stephen Harper achieved his false majority, a lot of things have happened that I just didn't think were possible in Canada. The suppression of science, the elimination of evidence, even the kind of evidence that we didn't think any government would mind, such as the census information, how to know what's going on, where's the data that will establish that there's evidence for public policy. The muzzling of scientists, the closing of libraries, and this is a really subtle one and hard to describe what a crisis it is because it's kind of one of those things that only policy wonks who spend a lot of time in Ottawa even think about much. I'm not sure how many of you ever worked in the federal civil service or a provincial civil service. You'd know what I'm talking about. The importance of having a dividing line between what the politically elected folks do and the protection and respect for the professional, nonpartisan civil service. And in Ottawa, there's the Office of the Prime Minister, which I'll come to talk about that bit more. And then the other side of the operation at Langevin Block, opposite Parliament Hill, is the Clerk of the Privy Council and the Privy Council Office. Now, nothing sounds much more archaic than the Privy Council Office, which is why people don't read about it in the newspapers. But the Clerk of Privy Council is essentially the Deputy Minister to the Prime Minister. The civil service side, the non-elected, non-partisan, non-political side, that when there's a new government provides the briefing books and takes instructions. I mean, it's really clear. The civil service takes instructions from politicians who are elected. But the Clerk of Privy Council when Paul Martin was Prime Minister, I remember him describing the relationship. He was saying, there's kind of a Chinese firewall between the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office. And it's really important that, you know, that communication flows. But it must never be the case, and at that time we didn't think there was ever such a risk, that the Prime Minister's office would start calling the shots and saying, I need a report that says such and such, as opposed to saying, research this information, get me the database, and then we'll decide as a matter of policy. And what's happened since Stephen Harper won the majority is that the firewall is down between the political operatives in the Prime Minister's office and the civil service. At first I thought the firewall was only down, that they were giving instructions like thunderbolts to the Clerk of Privy Council, who was then telling deputy ministers what they must do. But I've since talked to enough bureaucrats that it's really clear that even at fairly low levels within the system, these rather young political, partisan, cutthroat operatives from the Prime Minister's office feel entitled to phone civil servants at the Director General level, way below ADM level, pick up the phone and tell somebody who might have made the mistake of talking to the media that they're not allowed to do that anymore, or that they are instructed to do something on behalf of the Prime Minister. I mean, there's a pile of access to information reports that keep demonstrating this point. A Parks Canada announcement that was supposed to happen in Halifax a couple years ago, and the people in the PMO decided that the Parks Canada logo was ugly and couldn't they replace it with something. And I mean, meddling in little things, but also meddling in large things. And the meddling in large things is the sort of thing that happened in the Enbridge Northern Pipeline documentation, where there was a press release put out from Transport Canada that said, Transport Canada has done a study. Some of you may remember reading the newspaper coverage of this. It was probably about 2 years ago. Transport Canada has done a study that shows that supertankers can safely travel in and out of Kitimat. So I thought, okay, I'd like to see such a study. So I got hold of it and I read it. It doesn't say that at all. But it was clear from the way it was written that somebody on the political side, I mean, and I'll give more evidence for this, but someone from the political side had picked up the phone or sent they probably didn't send an email because those can be searched out through access to information and they don't like to leave a trail. Somebody told Transport Canada, we need a report that says tankers can safely travel. Because when you looked at the report, if you were looking at, if anyone who knows the route was thinking about supertankers traveling that route, you would expect on reading the report to have some reflection on the particular navigational hazards of the Hecate Strait, for instance. The Hecate Strait isn't mentioned in this report. None of the particular navigational hazards of going in and around the islands to get into Kitimat and up through the fjord, none of that is mentioned. It's not mentioned how long it takes to stop a supertanker from the moment you see you have a hazard ahead, that it's going to take about half an hour to get from where you see the problem to when you can stop, and how many kilometers it takes you to stop. That's not included. It does say things like this, at the narrowest point, all the channels are wide enough to allow a supertanker through. And it does say, supertankers, I should have brought the report with me. I wasn't planning to talk this in such detail, but I can find it. You can find it on our website if you want to. A supertanker draws this much. It's going to require, depths of at least this much to be able to go through all the channels. And there's only 2 or 3 places that aren't deep enough, so we'll avoid those. There's no discussion of navigational hazards, what you do during fog, what you do if a storm whips up on the Hecate Strait, what you're going to do about the multiple ways in which you can have failure. And when I read that report, what it actually concluded wasn't in the text, we have concluded at Transport Canada that supertankers can safely travel in and out of Kitimat. What it said is, we have concluded that there are no regulatory gaps. If there's an oil spill, Environment Canada is in charge. If there is another form of accident, the Coast Guard will be in charge. There is no regulatory gap. Nowhere in the report did it say what the press release said it said. This goes to, I talked about the census documentation. Another really tragic story is what happened. I didn't think I'd ever care passionately about the long form census. It wasn't on my list of core values. But when they decided to get rid of the long form census, the minister responsible was Tony Clement. Apparently, his deputy minister, a quite extraordinary man named Munir Sheikh. Munir Sheikh grew up in a Pakistani orphanage and was so brilliant he managed to get himself through the best schools in the world, come to Canada, and as a statistician, your top job of your dreams is to be the chief statistician for the government of the country in which you live. And so Munir Sheikh 3 times went to Tony Clement and said, we won't have reliable data if you kill the long form census and you don't have some other system that's going to at least provide as good data. 3 times Tony Clement went to the Prime Minister and said, if we kill the long form census, we won't have reliable data. And finally, the Prime Minister told Tony Clement told Munir Sheikh, and at that point, as I said before, it's up to the civil servants to do what the political wing has decreed. So they soldiered on, knowing that this was a bad decision for the integrity of our statistical information base, they soldiered on. But then Tony Clement, when the media started pushing back and people started asking questions, he said, listen, nobody's worried about this. Not a single person in my department has told me there'll be any problem if we get rid of the long form census. And that's when this valiant, noble civil servant quit the job of his dreams and resigned as deputy minister responsible for Statistics Canada. There are quite a lot of heroes in the civil service through this era of losing the respect for the independence